All right, so let's get into something I think we can probably all relate to. Um, Alone time. You know those times when you could be out with people or just scrolling on your phone, but you just feel like you need quiet, a little bit of space, just for you. And today we're going to be talking about something a little deeper than just introvert versus extrovert. We're doing a deep dive into the difference between solitude and loneliness.
And yeah, it's an important difference. We're looking at a piece called Texto Colado today.
Right, exactly. So Texto Colado really gets into how we can kind of change our thinking to turn the times when we're alone, which we might normally not like, into times that are good for us.
Yeah, definitely. Like maybe we can even start to like it, you know?
Probably.
It all starts with like knowing the difference between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness, as I think we all know, is that feeling of being empty, of being isolated, like you're disconnected even when you're around other people.
Yeah, it's like a feeling that just sits there and doesn't go away. And it's so easy to think that being alone always leads to feeling lonely. But Texto Colado makes a really good point about seeing it differently.
Yeah, the piece says that solitude is about choosing to be alone, like it's on purpose.
No.
You're stepping back from all of the craziness in the world so you can get back in touch with yourself.
So it's more about how you think about it than just being physically alone.
Exactly. Solitude is something you actively decide to do. You make space and time to reflect, to be creative, or even just to be. And making that choice changes everything. You start to see being alone as a good thing, something you want to do instead of something you want to avoid.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because Texto Colado points out all these things in society that make us think that being alone is weird.
Yeah, totally. It's like we've been taught that always being busy and connected is the only way to have a good life.
You know, sometimes I feel guilty when I say no to hanging out with friends because I just want to stay home and read. Like I'm missing out on something.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of thing that Texto Colado wants us to think about. It wants us to really look at these beliefs we have about being alone. And it reminds us that choosing solitude doesn't mean that we're antisocial or scared of other people. It just means that we know it's important to spend time with ourselves.
Which is so true, and that's what I really like about Texto Colado. It doesn't just define solitude and loneliness. It goes deeper and talks about the good things that happen when you embrace being alone.
Right, like it talks about how solitude gives you time and space for self-discovery.
Yeah, like when you finally stop all the thoughts in your head and just pay attention to how you feel.
And Texto Colado takes it further than that. It gives you a journaling prompt that I thought was really interesting. It asks, what thoughts or feelings keep coming back to you lately? It can be really helpful to write down your answers.
You know, I've been trying that one, and it's crazy what you start to notice about yourself when you take time to just stop and think.
I know. It's like you're looking in a mirror at your inner self.
Oh.
And that kind of self-awareness is so important for us to grow, personally and professionally.
So we're starting to see how being alone can help us understand ourselves better. But Texto Colado doesn't stop there. It also says that solitude can make us more creative.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, the source doesn't just say that. It actually talks about the science behind it, like research that shows how our brains work differently when we're alone.
So it's not just a feeling, there's actually evidence for it.
Exactly. When we have a lot of things happening around us, our brains are reacting to things, processing information, and responding to everything that's going on. But when we're alone, our brains can start to reflect. That lets us think more deeply, make creative connections, and have those aha moments.
Now I understand why a lot of artists, writers, and musicians say being alone is so important to them. It's like their brains need that quiet to work their magic.
Exactly. And Texto Colado suggests we try something to tap into that, like taking an entire afternoon, turning your phone off, and working on something creative that you've been putting off.
You know, I actually tried that last weekend, and it was amazing how much I got done when I finally just stopped looking at my phone and let myself create.
It's incredible how much we can do when we disconnect and let our minds wander, right?
Yeah.
And that leads us to another great thing Texto Colado talks about, emotional independence.
Okay, that one sounds interesting. What exactly is emotional independence when we're talking about solitude?
Well, think about it. When we spend all our time around people or on social media, it's easy to start depending on what other people think to feel good about ourselves. But solitude gives us a chance to build our inner strength and learn to be okay on our own.
So it's about being comfortable being alone and not always needing other people to tell you you're doing good.
You got it. Texto Colado uses a good example to show what I mean, like going to a movie or eating at a restaurant by yourself.
I've always thought that would be a little scary. Like everyone's looking at me and thinking it's weird I'm alone.
I know what you mean. But Texto Colado wants us to try to get past that. It says that doing these things alone can make you feel really strong. You're showing yourself that you don't need to have someone with you to enjoy simple things in life.
It's like you're going against what society tells us to do. You're taking back your right to enjoy your own company.
Right on. And there's something really freeing about realizing you don't need someone else to tell you it's okay to have fun.
I can definitely see how that would help you feel more confident and self-reliant.
And that confidence and emotional independence are so important when life gets tough.
We've talked about how solitude helps us understand ourselves, boosts creativity, and helps us be emotionally independent. But I'm sure people listening want to hear about that last benefit that Texto Colado talks about, the one we all need in this busy world, recharging our batteries.
Yeah, that one is maybe the easiest one to get. It's about giving your mind and body a break from everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's like pressing pause on everything and just allowing yourself to be.
Right. And Tetsocolato gives us a good idea for doing this. It says we should schedule a rest day every week.
Oh, okay.
Not a day for chores or running errands, but a day just for relaxing and taking care of yourself.
I like that. A whole day to forget about work and social media and just chill. That sounds amazing,
I
honestly.
know, right? But it's not just a nice idea. It's really important, especially with how busy our lives are these days. And Texto Colado says it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can just read a book, take a long bath, be out in nature, or listen to music. The important thing is to do things that make you feel good and help you rest.
I used to think all those self-care trends were kind of silly, but when you talk about them in terms of solitude, it makes more sense.
Yeah.
It's not just about pampering yourself, it's about taking time to let your mind and emotions recover.
That's a great point, and I think that's one of the big takeaways from Texto Colado, that solitude can be a really good thing for us when we do it on purpose.
Okay, so we've looked at all the great things about solitude. Finding yourself, boosting creativity, being more emotionally independent, and recharging. But I bet some people listening are thinking, okay, that's great, but what if I already feel lonely? How do I change that?
That's a great question. And Texto Colado says, turning loneliness into solitude isn't like flipping a switch. It's a process, like changing how you think and creating new habits.
So how do we start? What's the first step to enjoying being alone?
Well, Texto Colado says it starts with something we've already talked about,
Yeah.
remembering the difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is that choice to be alone, and loneliness is that feeling of being isolated. Just understanding that difference can be really helpful.
So we need to change how we think about being alone. Instead of dreading it, we start seeing it as a chance to grow, be creative, and take care of ourselves.
That's it. And Texto Colado uses a really cool analogy to explain this.
Oh,
It compares learning to enjoy solitude to learning a new language. Like you wouldn't expect to be fluent right away, right?
right.
It takes time, practice, and patience.
That makes sense. We don't get mad at ourselves when we mess up words while learning a new language. So why do we beat ourselves up when we have trouble enjoying being alone?
I know. We should be nice to ourselves and realize that this is a process. And speaking of process, Texto Colado suggests that we start small. Don't jump into a whole day of solitude right away. Try doing it a little bit at a time.
So like baby steps? Instead of going on a silent retreat, maybe start with just 15 minutes reading or a quick walk in nature.
Exactly. You create those little moments of being alone on purpose and slowly increase the time as you get more used to it.
And I guess the more you do it, the easier it becomes to enjoy those moments.
Yeah, for sure. It's like you're working out your solitude muscle. And Texto Colado says that finding things you actually like to do alone is super important for this.
I mean, that makes sense, right? If I force myself to do something I hate just to be alone, it's not going to work.
Exactly. Solitude should be enjoyable, something you look forward to. Maybe it's reading, gardening, listening to music, working on a project, or just being in nature. Texto Colado wants us to think about the things that make us happy and see if we can do those things alone.
So it's like turning alone time into me time. Time to fully enjoy the things that make us feel alive.
That's it. The source even suggests trying things we usually do with other people, but doing them alone instead, like trying a new restaurant or going to a museum.
I gotta admit, I still get a little nervous thinking about that.
I get it. And Texto Colado knows it can be hard to step outside our comfort zones, but it says that's often where we grow the most.
So it's like challenging those ideas we have in our heads about being alone in public.
Yeah. And who knows, you might even find out that you like it.
So we're starting small, finding things we enjoy doing alone, and maybe even trying new things by ourselves. Is there anything else Texto Colado says we should do?
Well, it really emphasizes being patient with ourselves and being kind to ourselves. Remember, learning to love solitude takes time and practice.
It's like any new skill. There are going to be times when we get frustrated or fall back into old habits.
Exactly. And Texto Colado tells us to be nice to ourselves when that happens. Not judgmental. It's a process, not something we can do perfectly right away.
So if you find yourself feeling lonely, even though you're trying to be alone, don't get mad at yourself. Just notice those feelings and try to bring yourself back to a peaceful place. Keep practicing.
Exactly. And I really like how Texto Colado puts it. Even people who are really good at solitude have days when it's hard. It's something we have to keep working at, a journey of self-discovery.
So it's not about becoming a hermit or something. It's about finding a balance that works for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the more you practice, the more natural and enjoyable solitude will become.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening for me. I'm thinking about being alone in a whole new way now. Texto Colado really changed my perspective.
Yeah, it's cool how just a few new ideas can completely change how we feel about something as basic as being alone.
It really is. So just to recap, for anyone who might have missed the beginning, we started by talking about the difference between solitude and loneliness. And we busted some of those common myths about being alone. Then we talked about all the great things that can happen when we're alone. We can understand ourselves better, we can be more creative, we become more emotionally independent, and we get that much needed break that our minds and bodies need. And lastly, we got practical, talking about things we can actually do to turn those times when we feel lonely into valuable experiences of solitude.
It's all about understanding how powerful solitude can be and using it to make our lives better.
You know, when we were talking about all the benefits of solitude, something from Texto Colado really stuck with me. It was that idea of rediscovering how happy we were as kids when we were just lost in our own little worlds.
Right. Like how kids can spend hours building with Legos or drawing or playing pretend, and they're totally happy just being by themselves.
And they're not worried about what other people think or whether they're doing it right. It's just pure joy in the moment.
And I think that's what Texto Colado is trying to help us get back to, that ability to find happiness and contentment inside ourselves, whether we're with people or enjoying our own company.
It's like remembering that we already have everything we need to feel complete and happy. So to wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think about this. Can you remember a time when you felt that kind of pure contentment just being alone? What were you doing? How did it make you feel? And the most important question is, can you make space in your life to feel that way more often?
Yeah, maybe it's time to pick up those old hobbies again. Rediscover those things that used to light you up or just let yourself unplug and be.
Exactly. Embrace the power of solitude.
Mhm.
You might be surprised by what you learn about yourself in the process.